For no specific reason at all, I've been thinking about intermissions recently.
How many minutes till the end of intermission? Is that how the show should open? Should there even be a show?
That's intervals for you across the pond.
And you shall receive the maximum punishment. Death! No!
Sir, may I be allowed a word?
A word?
One word!
It had better be a good one!
Oh, it is, sir.
What is it?
Intermission.
You know, the spot in the middle of the show where the curtain falls and the actors run off stage to change costumes and the crew maybe change the set around and you run off to the lobby to get one of those sippy cups with wine while Jessica Chastain rotates. For the audience, the intermission is 10, maybe 15 minutes, but for the action of the show, well, that depends, doesn't it? Sometimes an intermission takes hours, or days, or weeks, and some shows don't even have an intermission at all.
That's that. The curtain falls, and it's time for the intermission. At least it would be if we were actually sitting in the Morosco Theater watching The Drowsy Chaperone, which, of course, we are not. I don't like intermissions. They destroy the magic, you know? They yank you back into reality. One moment you're lost in a world of glamour and music, and then bang, you're surrounded by tourists.
But why? Where did intermissions come from? And are they going out of style in a landscape filled with TikTok-length attention spans? Well, we're gonna talk about it. But let me get some popcorn first.
Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Hey look, what's that? It's Musical Mash. Okay, first, a history lesson. If, like me, you wasted a bunch of money on theater college, then you've probably heard some gray-haired theater professor prattle on about the Aristotelian unities.
That is to say, the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle wrote in his theory of Greek theater, the Poetics, that all good dramas should adhere to 3 strict unities. 1, the unity of action. A drama should have one principal through line of action. Number 2, the unity of time. The action should occur over a period of no more than 24 hours. Number 3, the unity of place. A drama should exist in a single physical location. Got all that? All right. Well, I seem to have misplaced the rest of my slides for this lecture, so please bear with me as I read to you straight from this double-spaced Word document that I will not be sharing electronically. Now hold on for a moment as I figure out how to... They always move... Sorry, Aristotle didn't write about the unities in Poetics. Yeah, see, the Poetics really only partially survives through a series of translations and copies of copies, and that doesn't mean Poetics didn't exist or isn't accurate or wasn't a real thing that Aristotle created, but it does mean that with every academic who touches this thing, their own biases get introduced. Sometimes it's an accident, and sometimes it's on purpose. Well, I mean, that's probably what happened with the Venetian. You know, Gian Giorgio Trissino? Well, he wasn't reading Poetics, but he was reading Aristotle's Rhetoric. And Trissino was, you know, he was a Renaissance man in all senses of the word, but he was revisiting the Greek classics, as many folks were, when he wrote Sophinispa. Sophinispa! I'm not sure, sorry. And if you look it up in the encyclopedia, you'll find that it is literally the definition of terrible. So he was enamored with his poor translation of Aristotle's Rhetoric, not Poetics, and he adhered to his misconception of what eventually would be falsely attributed as the Aristotelian unities. Aristotelian? Where did you read this? This is all on Wikipedia. And then if you click the little references on there, you can follow this. Why am I paying for this course?
Trissino's boring play Sophonisba adhered strictly to the unities. Also, it was so boring. I have to read to you what Professor Beatrice Corrigan had to say about it. This literary curiosity I cannot boast of having read, but from other sources I know the author to be a spiritless pedant. Those even of the learned who are most zealous of the imitation of the ancients pronounce it a dull, labored work, without a breath of true poetical spirit. This was, of course, in Professor Corrigan's article that is, in part, an analysis of the play. I mean, she didn't even read the play before she wrote the paper? Sounds like college. Anyway, Trissino may or may not have been the accidental inventor of the unities. They very much seem to be in vogue with many other Renaissance men of the time, but he was the first to write about the... What are we talking about again? Intermissions. So, wherever they come from, the three unities of action, time, and place are perhaps the most important artistic considerations when it comes to intermissions. An intermission is an opportunity to almost secretly disrupt these unities. Here's some examples.
Disrupting the unity of action!
In West Side Story, Act 1 ends with the rumble, a tense, harrowing battle between the two gangs with no singing and 2 deaths. Act 2 opens with the light frolic that is I Feel Pretty. A complete shift in tone and, most importantly, action that would be much more difficult to do if the 2 scenes were presented back to back. Also, remember this one for later.
Disrupting the unity of time!
In Sunday in the Park with George, the entire musical kind of rotates around this disruption in time. Act 1 takes place in 1884, and Act 2 takes place a century later in 1984. That is, of course, excluding the part at the top of Act 2 where everyone in the painting sings to you, but whatever.
Disrupting the unity of place!
In Peter Pan, this one's easy. There are 3 acts and 3 locations. Act 1 is in the bedroom, Act 2 is in Neverland, and Act 3...
To the ship.
Each intermission disrupts the unity of place and hides the transition from one location to another, both in the story and physically. If you skim the canon of popular pieces of musical theater, you'll find a definitive hierarchy of which unities authors are more likely to disrupt with intermission. Almost by definition, the intermission will disrupt the action. You're going to find very few musicals where Act 2 starts exactly with the same action that Act 1 ended with. And usually these are shows that at some point did not have an intermission, like Pippin.
I told you, Act 2! We're going to take a little break here. After all, attention spans are shorter than they used to be.
Or 1776.
Good God! What in hell are you waiting for? Thomas, for God's sake, listen to me.
Below that in the hierarchy is disrupting the unity of time. Most intermissions disrupt at least a few hours, like In the Heights, or maybe a few weeks, something like Dear Evan Hansen, or maybe about 9 months with something like Into the Woods.
Thank you for the slipper.
Only a few shows seem to skip more than a year's time. Grey Gardens and Sunday in the Park come to mind. I've found that musicals rarely use intermissions as a disruption of the unity of place unless the show is doing that already. What I mean is, in shows that are already bouncing around to different places, intermission doesn't stand out as a huge place to do that because they've already been bouncing around to a bunch of different places in Act 1, and they're probably going to do it in Act 2, and so they're going to do it during intermission as well. Likewise, shows that already stick to a tight unity of place rarely use the intermission to disrupt that. There are so few of these, in fact, that we brainstormed on Twitter for a little bit, and thank you all. Some we came up with were, again, Sunday in the Park with George, obviously, which takes a leap from Paris to America, Anastasia leaping from St. Petersburg to Paris, Chess hopping from Italy to Bangkok, or Bangkok to Budapest, depending, and the Jerry Springer opera from the talk show set to Purgatory and then to Hell, and a few others. And of all shows, Jerry Springer the Opera brings up an important point about the nuance between acts and intermissions. You see, Jerry Springer the Opera has 3 acts, but it only has 1 intermission. It's between Act 1 and Act 2, and then Act 2 and Act 3 play next to each other. An even rarer example, the original production of The Apple Tree, which is really 3 musicals squidged together, has 2 intermissions. It's between Act 1 and Act 2, there's an intermission, and between Act 2 and Act 3, there's an intermission. That was in 1966, but when they revived it in 2006, it only had 1 intermission between Act 1 and Act 2. Between Act 2 and Act 3, there was a pause? And speaking of revivals, I told you we'd come back to this, when Ivo Van Hove wanted to cut intermission from West Side Story in his 2020 revival, he also ended up cutting the Act 2 opener, I Feel Pretty. Is it because the now more evident unity of action prevented this, like, tonal shift taking us from the rumble to the song? I don't know. I mean, I think it could have been pretty powerful if Riff and Bernardo's bodies were like slumped up stage while Maria and her friends were primping and preparing downstage singing I Feel Pretty. That, I mean, it'd say a lot, but I'm getting off topic. So that is kind of the capital A art of it all. Intermissions are a useful tool in the show writer's toolkit that allow them to mess with, or at least to have a conversation with, the unities of action, time, and place. But there is a flip side to the purpose of the intermission, and that is, of course, the artifice. Picture it. London, 1610. You are at the Blackfriars Theatre, the second one. There were 2. You're watching The Malcontent, a play by John Marsden, who was a contemporary to Shakespeare, and not the guy from the Red Dead video games. Now, it's not the play that's important, it's this. How the play is lit. You see, the Blackfriars Theatre was indoors, and thus lit by candles. Now, I don't know if this play had an intermission, certainly not in the way we understand intermissions today, but the move to indoor theaters like the Blackfriars in the 1600s would soon create a very pragmatic reason for the interval. You see, candles like these, whether in footlights or suspended in chandeliers, would need tending to, and you don't want to do that in the middle of the show, so you have an intermission to tend to the candles. But now, how do you keep folks from leaving the theater during intermission? Well, that's easy. You sell them stuff. Vendors started appearing during intermissions of the 17th and 18th centuries, and now you know why you have that wine sippy cup. Backstage as well, intermission is a time for big set changes or costume changes, or for actors maybe to catch a breath or take a bio break, unless you're Ben Platt, of course. Every few years or so I see a new think piece from some theater critic stating that intermission is dead, and, well, I can imagine when your whole job is centered around consuming and digesting theater as quickly as possible so that you can meet that midnight deadline so you can get it in the paper. Well, that bonus 15 minutes during intermission where you're not doing anything, that must be agonizing to wait through. On the other side, though, intermissions are seeing a growing recognition as a necessary accessibility function for shows. They are for folks who can't sit for extended period of time, or folks who have bathroom needs and deserve a graceful way to care for themselves. The data does point to a growing number of musicals without intermissions. With a sample size of Tony-nominated shows from the last 74 years, we see our first one-act show with Man of La Mancha in 1966, and from there, 1 or 2 one-acts show up every few years, with a bit of a dry spell in the 80s that's probably related to some confounding factors. Now, intermissions on Broadway and in musical theater at large seem to be a reaction to whatever the status quo is. Some shows want to be longer. there is a perhaps apocryphal story about Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, that the Megamix was added into the end of that because audiences who were leaving saw that they were the first theater to get out and felt like they had been ripped off for their ticket price. On the other hand, some shows want to be shorter. The song We Like Spelling got cut from Spelling Bee to make it a one-act on its way to Broadway. Even further, some directors and playwrights lean into the discomfort that a lack of an intermission can create. This is what Robert O'Hara and Jeremy O. Harris did with the 2-hour, no intermission slave play in 2018. So, will we see the slow death of intermissions as the theater status quo leans towards shorter and more quick-fire content? Well, my gut says probably not. We have entered this age where, across YouTube and TikTok and film and stage and every other art form, the forms themselves have become so malleable that we now try to fit the form into the content that an artist is trying to create. So I think for shows that need an intermission, they'll have an intermission. And for shows that don't need an intermission, they won't have an intermission. And heck, I bet we're going to see even more of the intermission being a deeper consideration of the show itself. It's already starting to creep into some shows, and audiences love it. If you ask me, though, I always do enjoy an intermission. It's a moment to reflect on what has come before and to think about what might happen next. Taking a break is great, and sometimes the best part of that break is the end, where the show picks up right where it left off. Oh my gosh. Okay, wait, sorry. One more thing. Hello. If you like this stuff, if you like these videos, please consider supporting my Patreon. I'm back, I'm here, and I want to do more of this, and the thing that's going to help me do more of this is if it can help me pay my mortgage, I guess. It's awfully adult. Something more fantastical. Fund my wildest dreams! Not that wild. Pretty normal dreams. Anyway, thanks for watching.